Hi, my name is Mark Rothenberg. Welcome to my video channel. This is my inaugural video, and I thought I would put a video out there into the universe talking about my experience with weight loss camp. In particular, I was sent to Camp Shane in Ferndale, New York. Camp Shane has since changed locations. It's no longer at its original Ferndale campus. They've, I think, franchised it, so now there's a Camp Shane, California. I think there's still a Camp Shane up in the Northeast, and of course there are a number of other weight loss camps out in the universe. They've been made popular on TV shows, on MTV, Tyra Banks, Oprah. You'll certainly see a number of them, as well as the experiences that those kids have had. As a parent and as an attorney, I think it's important to think critically about this decision, be very careful with this decision. So again, I'm 45 years old. I was sent to Camp Shane in the summer of 1988. I still remember it to this day. I made it painfully clear to my parents that I did not want to go. I wanted nothing to do with that camp. And my parents, I think like many parents of the era, but my parents are wonderful people. And I was blessed in that my parents would spend resources on me, so I don't want to come off as being ungrateful. I don't blame my parents for having sent me. They did the best they could with the information they were given. However, as an attorney, you need to do your due diligence. And I encourage clients when they're struggling with decisions, whatever the decision is, to think critically about this issue and to do your due diligence. And I'm going to focus on Camp Shane because, again, that's the camp that I went to, but this analysis can just as easily be applied to any camp. First and foremost, you have to ask yourself the question, what's the issue here? And of course, I think most people would say, well, the issue is I have a child that's struggling with a weight issue. But you have to dig deeper than that. And I think a lot of parents have trouble with that. They don't dig deeper. They don't get to the core of why is my child eating? Why is my child struggling with weight? Why is my child putting weight on? And there are a number of reasons why that may happen. It may be a medical issue. It might be a glandular problem. I'm certainly not qualified to speak on those issues, but you obviously want to rule out if there's some medical issue. Food in and of itself is a drug. I mean, it has a drug-like impact. That's why we think about if we break up with a spouse or break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, I mean, what does society teach us? Well, we're going to have a pint of ice cream. Or we're going to have chocolate to make us feel better when we're down in the dumps. And so food has a drug-like effect. Certainly sugar does. And I'm not one of these people that's going to advise you to take this diet or that diet. At the end of the day, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not qualified to do that either. But food feels good. And we associate memories with food. And so in many respects, your child may be in some ways medicating. And so that brings us to the third reason. There may be some emotional issue or issues at play. It's unfortunately, it's circuitous. The child feels terrible about themselves. Maybe they had a bad day or a bad week. Maybe they're being bullied. And so they eat because eating makes them feel better, but then they gain weight, which prompts even more bullying, which causes more eating, and you're sort of stuck in that nasty, vicious circle. So is it a self-esteem issue? Is that why your child is eating? So you've got possibly medical, you've got, again, food having almost a drug-like hold on a child, and of course you have the emotional issues that might be triggering eating. So if that's the issue, then you have to ask yourself, well, is a camp like Camp Shane going to address it? Camp Shane for years and years, and this was certainly true in the 80s when I went, they had a before and after series of photographs about a young boy named Tony. And my very limited understanding of the situation is that I understand that Tony, whom I identified in conversations with folks on Facebook, passed away very recently, and it looks like he struggled with weight his entire life. And so you have to ask yourself about a camp like this, what is the long-term success rate? This is not an inexpensive proposition. You're about to spend a lot of money on this. And so if I spend the money on this camp, is my child going to gain the weight back within 6 months, within a year? Are they going to have to go back? And the reality is that most camps, in fact, I don't think any of them do, keep statistics on how well the campers do after they leave. Why? Well, what's their motivation to do that? There is none. So I'm being somewhat cynical about this. But at the end of the day, there's no motivation on their part to analyze how many kids gain that weight back within a few months or within a year, 2 years, 3 years, and so forth. So are you spending all of this money and not getting anything in return? Now, in terms of what does the camp deliver? Well, again, I went during summer of 1988. I'm sure that the program has changed to some degree. Perhaps the method by which they analyze nutrition has changed. But if you look at the marketing materials, in my opinion, I don't think they've changed all that much. I don't think any of the camps really do. They emphasize emotional well-being, they emphasize confidence, and a lot of them still have the before and after photographs, which I think are somewhat sad. In the first photograph, you typically see a child that looks downtrodden, looks upset, looks depressed, looks terrible. They've got the double chin, perhaps they have the little boy boobies, they've got love handles, and they just look miserable. In the after photograph, the child is doing the Superman pose, right? They're looking like this, and they've got the big smile on their face, or perhaps they are pulling the shorts forward to show you how much weight they've lost. If it's a little girl, it might be a little girl wearing an ill-fitting bathing suit, looking miserable, and the same sort of Supergirl pose in the second photograph. The idea, I think, that these images put out there, and I think they're very careful with their messaging and not making guarantees, but the general idea, I think, is this. Again, this is just my opinion, but it's send us your child, send us your money, and we will send your child back having waved the magic wand, and your child will lose a lot of weight and be happy. And the reality is, for, I think, many kids that go, that may very well be the case. The question is whether or not your child is going to fall into that category, or will your child be damaged by having been sent? And so, very briefly, my experience, again, I was sent summer of 1988. I did not want to go. I think I was carrying roughly 30 or 40 pounds on me. I wasn't obese, but I was definitely a heavy kid. I had the double chin, the little boy boobies, love handles, and so forth. I definitely could have stood to lose some weight. And I begged and pleaded with my parents. I said, I don't want to go here. I'm not interested in this camp. Let me lose this weight on my own. And my parents, again, wanted me to look good for my bar mitzvah. They cared about my health. They had friends who had gone to the camp before, and they fell for it. They spent the money. They sent me. And true to the camp's word, over the course of, if memory serves, 8 weeks, I lost roughly 40 pounds. And my mother would say things to me, even to this day. I didn't recognize you when you got off the plane because you looked so different. The double chin was gone, the little boy boobies were gone, the love handles were mostly gone. And so by all appearances, it was a great success. What my parents didn't understand, and I've tried to explain this to them very recently, it's taken me years to really come to grips with this. What my parents never really understood was I very much felt like I had been thrown away. I felt that I had been abandoned. I felt that I was so hideous I had to be sent 1,000 miles away to this camp. And in many respects, to me, that camp felt like it was the gulag. It felt like I was in prison. And when you approach a camp like that, you're already there, you're negative, you're upset, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're ticked off, and you view the camp from the prism, from the lens of this is a prison. All of the elements of a prison, many of the elements of a prison, again, I'm exaggerating for dramatic flair, but I hope you follow my logic here. Camp had walls and security. Well, you would imagine that any camp that has kids is going to have some degree of security, but they had big walls. The camp had what I suppose you could describe as a mugshot. They took the photographs of us without our shirts on. When you're 12 years old, the last thing you want someone to do is take a picture of you with your shirt off, especially if you're struggling with weight and self-confidence and self-esteem issues. In addition to which, they would screen the mail. I got some packages from friends. Someone sent me some cookies. I think they were even diet cookies, and the camp confiscated them. So your mail is now being reviewed, and your packages being looked at and opened to make sure that you're not bringing contraband in. In addition to which, you can't bring any money in. Thankfully, I had snuck some money in, but you weren't supposed to have money in the camp. You weren't allowed to call home. They were very careful about not letting the kids call home. Now, if you go on their website, they explain that, kids have to acclimate, they have to settle in, and that's why we don't want them calling home. But, the reality is they made it very difficult to call home. And I think that if you could have called home with some degree of freedom or regularity, and this is before cell phones, you would have complained to your parents nonstop. You would have been crying and sobbing about what was happening to you. And what we didn't understand at the time, again, I was 12, to some degree you're detoxing. You don't know that. But you're going off of sugar, you're detoxing, you feel lousy, you feel horrible, and you don't understand what's happening. Now, perhaps they do a better job these days of explaining to kids what's going on. They certainly didn't when I was there. In addition to which, the meals were absolutely atrocious, and I welcome you to really get into details with the camp, doing your due diligence, going on Yelp, and trying to get a good understanding of what is my child going to eat there. My recollection, again, this is almost 40 years ago, my recollection is bread with melted cheese, baked chicken, apple butter. For some reason, they had this weird, bizarre apple butter. Water, and occasionally there'd be some other vegetables, things of that nature. But the food was absolutely atrocious, and there wasn't much of it. You really couldn't get seconds. You were always hungry, despite what the camp says. I mean, again, I went in '88, but if you go on Yelp, you'll see reviews from some of the campers and from some of the parents that are still to this day disgusted with regard to what this experience was for their kids. Now, I'm obviously being very cynical and being very negative because it really hurt to have been sent there. I mean, I was counting the days as if I were in the Chateau d'If, from the Count of Monte Cristo. And in fact, I actually tried to escape, but our escape attempt was, we had several bunkmates who overheard us planning. I'm not sure where 2 12-year-olds were how far we were going to get, but we were ratted out and brought into the camp director's office and yelled at for a solid half an hour until we were both sobbing. But there's just something not normal about that. You would so desperately try to escape a camp. And there's a wonderful movie called Heavyweights. It dates back to the 90s. It's a comedy, but it wasn't that far from what we were dealing with. I also remember we had a field trip. You could go on these paid excursions, and I went on a field trip. I think it was to Philadelphia, and then there was another one to Washington, D.C. And on the field trips, I think we were 4 or 5 boys to a motel room, and we would launch these sort of wonderful raids down to the vending machine where we had sort of a squad that would go out and distract. We had lookouts, and we would send several of the kids down to the vending machine, and they would come back with all of the Frito-Lay stuff that you would get out of the vending machine, Coca-Cola, M&Ms, and I remember in my mind I can still sort of hear that Hallelujah chorus as sort of M&Ms were flying in the air, soda was being popped open, and the mist from the Coca-Cola was in the air, and it was probably one of the finest moments of my life. I mean, getting married, seeing my wife for the first time in her wedding gown, seeing our children born, those obviously are the top 4 moments, but that 5th moment would definitely be seeing M&Ms and candies and food that we had not seen for, at that point, probably 5 or 6 weeks. So, when I got home from Camp Shane, again, I was 12. All of the people were saying these wonderful things about me. Oh my God, you look amazing. You look fantastic. You've lost so much weight. You look incredible. And it would sort of go through this filter in my mind of, you were so horrible and disgusting that you had to be sent against your will 1,000 miles away to, you looked horrible to you are horrible, you still look horrible. And that's how I felt for years. And the reason I mention that is because, again, doing that due diligence and thinking about a camp experience like this, and thinking about whether or not this is right for your child, how successful is this camp going to be long term? Especially if your child is coming at it with these kinds of emotional issues, self-confidence and self-esteem issues. Now, luckily, fortunately, puberty started shortly after I came back from the camp, and the nice thing about being a teenage boy is that to some degree, your metabolism really goes into overdrive. You can eat a lot and not gain weight. And I was very, very careful for the first probably 3 or 4 months after I got home, not because I had learned anything I didn't already know at the camp. It's just I was terrified of my parents sending me back. But after 3 or 4 months, my eating habits resumed. I was eating the sugar cereals that were popular in the 1980s. I was demolishing large or extra large cheese pizzas and a 6-pack of Coke when my parents weren't home, and then disposing of the evidence. I would eat subs and other foods with reckless abandon. But again, I was fortunate that I was hitting puberty and my body was able to absorb that. I started coming into my own, finding high school debate and competing on a national level, and doing really well in that, and writing for our school's literary magazine, and finding things that mattered to me, things that I was good at. And so as my self-esteem improved, my eating started to decline. But here's the thing. Later in life, namely law school and coming out and paying taxes and working and not knowing what you're doing, as many young lawyers I find when they come out of law school, they have no idea what they're doing, and self-esteem and self-confidence issues come back. Food is the drug. It's there again, and my weight ballooned rather dramatically within a year or two of law school starting. Or just getting out of law school. I mean, my weight really exploded. And I remember my weight I went from a waist size of 34 to a 36 to a 38, to finally to a waist size of 40. And I said, my weight's not going to get any worse than this. I'm going to stop. I'm not going to buy any clothing, anything with a waist size over a waist size 40. And then what ended up happening is the sort of Homer Simpson effect, where your stomach just goes over your pants. And it took several years, really took about 10 to 12 years before I finally came to grips with my weight and found ways to deal with it. And I think that the way that I dealt with it, and I think the way that a lot of kids really should be encouraged to look at and think about, and again, this is just my opinion, is hitting it from several different angles. That is, first and foremost, why are you eating? What are the emotional issues that you're having? And seeing a competent therapist that can work you through those issues and whatever your traumas are. It doesn't mean you need to be seeing a shrink for weeks on end or months on end or taking antidepressants or what have you, but you need to talk to someone and you need to get off your chest whatever it is that's bothering you, whatever stressors you can't deal with, finding ways to cope with things other than through eating. In addition to which, you need to see a physician. And in particular, you should see someone, I think, with bariatrics experience. And that doesn't mean having stomach stapling. It doesn't mean having a balloon implanted in you. It just means ruling out whether or not there are any medical or physiological issues. And partnering with a nutritionist. And you might find, as it worked for me, it doesn't work for everyone. And certainly people out in the universe whether they be fitness gurus or in other industries that don't like the competition, I suspect might object, but you might find yourself being prescribed Phentermine for short periods of time, provided that it's done under the direction of a competent physician, not someone in your chiropractor's office who happens to be administering that stuff. No, seeing an actual bariatrician, someone who is board certified, who really understands what they're doing and can guide you in appetite suppressants for short bursts of time, as well as nutritionists to get you on the right track. So in addition, again, finding some other outlet for the food. So you've now hit it from several fronts. And if physical fitness is not your thing, if you hate gyms, as I do, I never liked going to gyms, I still don't like going to gyms. It may be as simple as forcing yourself to take a long walk every day for an hour or two, just doing something, 10,000 steps, whatever it is, it's free. I'm just going out for long walks with my dog. And that's really what I did. So again, tackling the weight issues in a number of different ways. Now, as a parent, what does that mean? I mean, again, you're looking at spending a mountain of money to send your child to one of these camps because you're worried about them, as my parents were for me. You want the best for your child. But again, is this going to work long term? Now, I think another option might be, instead of spending all of that money to send your child and then possibly having to send them again if it fails, or looking at other options if it fails, you might consider that summer finding a good therapist with experience dealing with kids that have weight issues, a nutritionist, physician, and on top of that, finding something that the child likes, something the child wants to do. And it may not involve physical activity. That may be counterintuitive. Again, these are just my opinions. Who the hell am I? But it may seem counterintuitive, but it seems to me that if you can address the self-confidence or self-esteem issue, and that's one of the reasons why the child is eating. So perhaps it's your child wants guitar lessons, your child wants to learn how to code Minecraft, your child wants to learn how to write stories, whatever it is. It might be a better use of your money. Now, there are those that say, well, my child wants to go to a place like Camp Shane, and they understand what it's all about. And to those parents, I say, that's fantastic. Your child should then go. I mean, I wouldn't stop anyone from making a decision like that or ask them not to do that. I think that if your child comes to the conclusion on their own that they need the discipline associated with a place like Camp Shane, where their mail is going to be monitored, where they are going to be, their calories are going to be restricted, they're only going to be eating certain types of foods for the summer, and they understand that this is a temporary thing, that they're going to get that good swift kick in the pants, and they're going to be able to go to a camp with other kids that are similarly situated to them, right? You're at camp with other heavy kids, so the idea is that all of these kids are sort of in the same boat, and they all sort of appreciate what everyone else is going through, and there's this sort of team spirit. We're all cheering for one another, and I want that. So if your child comes to that conclusion on their own, and they understand that this is short term, and they understand that that this is just to give them a good swift kick in the butt, by all means, send your child. If, on the other hand, your child is much more circumspect, your child argues with you, does not want to go, please think long and hard about whether or not you're going to force your child to do this, because it will damage them. And again, that's my opinion. It's anecdotal, but that's what happened to me. I was horribly resentful about having been sent for years. I felt like my parents didn't trust me. I felt that my parents had abandoned me, had thrown me away. I felt like garbage. I felt like I was garbage that had just been discarded. And, the camps they're very good about this in terms of recognizing that when parents are doing that sort of initial due diligence, they say the right things. And I'm very cynical about this, and I think you need to probe it and test it. They talk about emotional support, they talk about helping to sort of recalibrate your child's eating and how they think and providing emotional support. But be realistic about that. I mean, if you think about it, if your child has been bullied for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, whether it be emotional bullying or physical bullying, and sometimes that bullying comes from their loved ones, their parents, their grandparents. It's the eye roll, it's the, do you really need to eat that? It's the parent that will just stops buying sweets altogether or hides them, puts them in a safe, locks them somewhere in the house. And so you've now had 6, 7, 8 years of that. Do you honestly believe that a 2 or 3 month program in upstate New York or in California or anywhere else is going to deprogram your child and pull all of that out of their head? So at the very least, another thing you might consider doing is sending your child to, again, a therapist that has experience dealing with kids that have weight issues, and talk to the therapist about whether or not this is a good thing. Because the last thing you want to do, I would think, certainly as a parent, the last thing that I would want to do is send a child who doesn't want to go, send a child who is going to be incredibly resentful, send a child who's going to view this as being thrown away and view the experience as being sent to the gulag, being sent to jail, being sent to prison. And that feeling carries with them for the long haul. They may not talk about it, but it's there. It's something that is sort of a good swift kick in the shins. And as opposed to encouragement from their parents and just gentle support, that you would just be forced to do this, despite the fact that you were pleading with your parents not to send you. Again, that's what happened to me. And when I read on Facebook or other forums about kids that similarly either escaped or tried to escape, I always sort of imagined what it would have been like if I could go back and to be a 12-year-old again and find a way to get thrown out of the camp. Because frankly, I think that my life probably would have had a slightly more positive trajectory. It's turned out just fine. I'm truly blessed, but I think that's really one of the regrets that I have in life, that I didn't find a way to get myself thrown out of the camp. I was very unhappy there. And so much so that here I am at age 45, and I'm recording a video for parents strongly urging you to think long and hard about this. Again, I went in the summer of '88. It was a long time ago. Still remember it. The ownership of the camp, I think Mr. Ettenberg was just taking over at that time from his parents. And now it's franchised, so I don't know who the owners are. But I'm seeing a lot of the same stuff in their marketing materials. It really hasn't changed much in terms of how they market the camp. So again, just do your due diligence. Just think long and hard. I hope this little talk has helped. And I'm happy if you want to send me emails. I'm happy to share my experience with you, how I processed it, how I finally dealt with my weight issues. I'm at a very healthy and happy weight now. But again, just think long and hard about this. If your child comes to it and will be part of that 50% of kids that loved it or more, there are lots of people who write wonderful reviews about these places. It was life-changing. It was fantastic. It was great. But I think there's also a lot of kids that stay quiet. And I'm finally going to say something about this. I think there are a lot of kids that really were miserable. That this camp did way more harm to them than good. Again, that's anecdotal. There were certainly other kids in my bunk that felt the same way. And I'm sure to this day there's still a lot of kids out there that are sort of suffering in silence. Again, we're truly blessed if this is the worst thing that happens to us in life, but I want to see if I can spare those similar kids that were similar to me, a little bit of pain, and help parents just make a well-informed decision. So again, thanks again, and feel free to email me if you'd like to chat more.